Good evening, everyone. It is a great pleasure to welcome you to the second meeting of our online group to study the Spiritist teaching of Allan Kardec and Joanna de Angelis. I'm Fabrício Assunção from the Spirit Society of Bournemouth in England. These studies are brought to you through international collaboration from the Spiritist Society of Bournemouth, the Brazilian Spiritist Medical Association Brazil, and the Spiritist Institute from the United States of America. We hope that these studies every month will give you everyone a deeper insight into the Spiritist writing of Allan Kardec and Joanna de Angelis, and also reveal to you an integrated view of spirituality and transpersonal psychology. We are pleased to have us our distinguished guest speakers tonight, Tiago and Alexandre, both from Brazil. They will give their talk in Portuguese. We are also very pleased to have with us Dr. Dana Sissi from the Spiritist Institute, who will give us simultaneous translation into English. The theme of tonight's talk is the influence of spirits on our thoughts, based on the records of our perispirit. It refers to the Spirit's book by Allan Kardec, Part 2, Chapter 9, entitled Intervention of Spirits in the Corporal World. Let me say some few words about our speakers. Tiago Risotto. Tiago is a psychologist and is a graduate from the University of Brasilia. He holds a specialization in analytical psychology from the Jung Institute of Brasilia. He is a specialist in forensic psychology and has been working for 13 years with juvenile offenders in the social educational system of the Federal District in Brazil. Tiago is a researcher and a member of the Psychology and Spiritism group at the Department of Mental Health of the Brazilian Medical Spiritist Association. He is also a member of the Medical Spiritist Association of the Planalto region. Next, an introduction about Alexandre Fontoura dos Santos. Alexandre is a psychologist, historian, and teacher. He is a professor of courses on Spiritist psychology of Joanna de Angelis. Alexandre is a member of the Medical Spiritist Association of Rio Grande do Sul, and internationally, he teaches courses through the Spiritist Medical Association of Brazil. Let me also introduce Dr. Dana Sissi, who will be our language translator tonight. He has a distinguished record of service of the Spiritist movement. He has a doctorate degree in education. Dan is a founding member of the Spiritist Institute in the USA. He is also an author and gives public talks on the spirituality and spiritism in the USA and internationally. Tonight, we will have a time for questions and answers where all questions will be asked through the Zoom chat. It is now my pleasure to hand over to Tiago, Alexandre, and Dan for tonight's study on the theme of influence of spirits on our thoughts based on the records of our perispirit. Over to you, Tiago, Alexandre, and Dan.
Hello, everyone. I wish you a good day in our second meeting today with a great happiness to introduce you to a great friend of us, our friend Thiago. And if you do not know Thiago, you will have a chance to meet him today. Hey, Thiago, I just wanted to say hello and introduce you. Hello, friends. It's great to be here with you. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to think together, to think about our spiritual reality, and to think how Spiritism can help us in the self-awareness movement and the discovery of life. So we'll have a great meeting for sure. Yeah, we have a very interesting topic, Tiago. We have a chance to share already with other folks at different times, especially talking about to something that connects psychology and mediumship. Because if Kardec brings us this constant interaction between those who are alive in the body and alive outside of the body, because we're all alive, so incarnated and discarnated, if there is this constant interchange, then it affects our human psychology more than we can often understand, and in ways that are more frequent than we expected. In two ways. In a and the unconscious level, the mediumistic style that can be unconscious, as we see that in the medium's book, because we're all mediums in a certain way. All of us have that sensibility, even though we may not be aware that many of our thoughts have a certain degree of influence from these minds that are discarnate in this world of vibrations. And of course, there is a second case as well of the extensive mediumship that is able to perceive more clearly this contact with the spirits. And psychologically, we can say that it's a conscious way. And in one instance, we only have the unconscious perception of those thoughts, and the second one happens more consciously. So we can say, according to the spirits in the mediumship, the medium's book, that these spirits around us can get to know our most secret thoughts, and that we're never really thought as we expect, because our vibrations, our thoughts, the ways of feeling, of conceiving the world and rationalizing and to react emotionally to what happens to us will always have a connection to this spiritual population that for us who are here in the physical world may appear to be invisible. So from that point, we can start to see how that interacts with each other. And so that's maybe a good place for us to start. And Kardec asked, like, do spirits see everything that we do? Can they know our most secret thoughts? And then this is when I invite you to the conversation, Thiago. So it's interesting, friends, because we're talking about phenomena between spirits who are discarnated and with us who are incarnated. Could these phenomena have taken place in the study of psychology? Yes, but for academic and ideological decisions, and for many different reasons. A lot to what we are going to ask about today were already an object of study and in the psychology in the 19th century, in the 20th century. For us, it's important as we read the questions and the answers, we can see that spirits are indeed capable of understanding our thoughts. And to what degree can they be aware of these thoughts and read us, so to speak? And we know through our human experience that thoughts and feelings tend to be suppressed to our unconscious. And that seems to be present in the answer of the spirits. There's a desire for us to hide that. But today we understand that through analytical sciences, it doesn't matter if we're suppressing thoughts, emotions, feelings, they are still act psychically on us. What calls our attention is this unconscious dimension through images, through emotions, that spirits are able to visualize. So our relationship to the spirits in many ways is one that exposes us when we can't hide from them, even if we can hide from ourselves. So the psychodynamic studies about the unconscious take place a lot at the end of the 19th century. The spirits are now telling us that the same suppressed thoughts can be understood by the spirits. And they may use those perceptions to connect to us, to influence us. So beyond the idea of not being able to be aware of these spiritual influences, there's also a component that we can also influence ourselves for that which we do not know about ourselves. So see how complex that can be. That there are two worlds, a spiritual and a physical one, connect and enmesh into others. And our personalities then connect as well in processes that may be conscious or unconscious. That which Thiago brings to us have a connection to spiritual studies in the beginning of psychology, tell us about the nascent period of psychology as a researcher of consciousness. So, from the second half of the 19th century, when psychology begins to emerge, we have lots of different paradigms about understanding the unconscious. Before Freud, we have Frederick Myers, Charcot, and so many others who bring us different perspectives, although Freud has been made more famous later because he brought a map of the unconscious in his theories, of course. So we have a lot who have already studied mediumship or mediums, for instance, Pierre Janet or William James, and Frederick Myers, who is the author of the term sixth sense, and who also talk about the subconscious, the subliminal conscious, or subliminal consciousness, I should say. It's also one of the early theoreticians of psychology. Not only did he study mediums, he also studied the idea that mediumship is inscribed in the conscience. And so mediums are those, according to him, who are able to make the connection to their unconscious. And he's one of the great fathers of psychology. So it has a lot to do with what Tiago is bringing us. And we understand then that for us to have a truly psychological picture of human beings, this constant interchange does not scare us. We're not worried about that. That's natural. And so we are the entire time in contact with spirits without a body, being attracted and attracting them. And now it's easier for us to understand that because we have Wi-Fi and so forth, and we see those networks. And the same happens to those who are in the flesh. We have sometimes ideas who connect, and not by chance, the spirits can bring us evolved or less evolved images and ideas that show up in different parts of the world without their authors having contact. For instance, the development of airplane happened in the United States and France at the same time. We have the theory of Darwin. He studied 20 years in secret, for instance. He was a little bit insecure about that. And so, and there was also a younger man, Wallace, an Australian, and um, and and he also arrived at the same location. Even though they published that separately, they were able to also author that. So also Wallace was able to be credited for that. And so sometimes we see that some ideas are in the air. The European feudalism happens at the same time at the Japanese feudalism, for instance, with the shoguns, perhaps are the expression of the same thing that happened in Europe. And there are many studies around that. So we'll see that this interchange is constant, not by chance that talk by Paul the Apostle that says that we might think that we are alone, but there is a cloud of witnesses that follow us. And the spirits tell us that even the most secrets that we keep away from ourselves can be known by the spirits. Their desires, their wills, that may not be very clear yet to our consciousness, but are for the spirits. And so see how that interchange is everywhere and sometimes can be better seen historically and culturally in different times, but also in our day to day life. How much of our personal psychology has, yes, its personal aspect, but it also has a social collective aspect to it from an energetic perspective. Yes, and Tiago, and you made me remind myself of a story about the origin of ideas. It almost feels like these ideas rain down symbolically, poetically, in the course of human history, enlightening our consciousness and having spirits incarnating with very particular missions in the many different fields of culture and thought. I'm reminded of an interview given by Bob Dylan, the musician, and he was asked, where does it come from? Everything that you write. Where does the poetry, the intensity, the lyrics? And he says, I don't know. But they were the most intense and creative years. Not that they would not stay, but there was a different intensity that left a mark in his music. And interesting that these people who we call genius or inspire people of many different fields of knowledge, arts, philosophy, we're talking about poetry, science, they seem to be given some sort of responsibility to unveil different dimensions of truth out of life. And Bob Dylan once talked to another musician, Leonard Cohen, and Leonard Cohen in Paris, as they talked, Bob Dylan asked him, I loved your song Hallelujah. How long did it take for you to do it? Leonard answered a little shy, 2 years. But in truth, it was 5 years. And he asked, I really liked the last song in your album called I and I. How long did it take for you to write it? And Bob Dylan said 15 minutes. So there is an intensity from a creative perspective in some souls that they're able to channel or collect and connect this spiritual world through a sensibility and ability that today we understand as mediumship, but that expresses itself through elaborations and constructions that touch us deeply. In the field of human and social interactions, it's important for us to say that here we are trying to open our souls to the Spiritist knowledge, and we cannot stop thinking how culture is a reflection of the intervention of the spirits in our lives. To the extent that we read the answers and questions, it's important for us to stop and reflect, to think about what is the fantastic, the extraordinary, like through movies, for instance, and that which the spirits tell us and how that contact is done with us, so that we may be able to reflect between that which is supernatural and get closer to the natural. Because we're talking about relations in a world of exchanges as part of life. So when Alexander mentioned the scientists, and I talked about the two musicians, we're talking about this interchange that does not stop. And the spirits tell us, and they do it because there is specific reasons for our evolution. And it's interesting also on the chapter of creativity, this, which is very interesting, this whole story with Bob Dylan. And Beethoven also said that his ninth symphony, he heard that from the angels, from God. So that came through his mind So there's this process of co-creation between those who are incarnated and who discarnated. And as we can understand it through the eyes of Spiritism. So, and there's also negative creativity, as the author Andrew Lewis tells us in a book psychographed by Francis Xavier, that case of a journalist who wanted to downplay or hurt somebody, and he created a fake news who was under the influence of a spirit who wanted to hurt that person without being aware. And like the case of some cultural aspects, for instance, that lead us to violence or hatred or an emotional unbalance. Of course, that in terms of culture and art, everything is possible. Nothing is prohibited in that sense. But culture will also showcase our humanity. It has that shadow, has that plus and minuses, and has that desperation, as it does have the search for understanding and a greater comprehension of life. And all of that is also be expressed in that relationship. And we're talking about creativity here, and that happens in every moment. So, how does our free will fall into that? If the thoughts that are coming to me can be originated from somewhere else, or they can be mine, but could have been fueled by a spirit who may have put more energy into that topic, whether it's a good spirit trying to help me or one less good who wants to harm me, how can I know which thought is mine? How will I have the free will? And the spirits tell Kardec that at our evolutionary stage, mediumship is still very unconscious, and that helps us preserve that free will. Because if we knew the source of all these thoughts, so we would have taken some decisions without being our merit, and it wouldn't be so spontaneous, so natural. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if the thought was suggested by a spirit or if it comes from us. The important part is how I will value that thought, because I am the responsible person for my actions. I am the one who will have to harbor my a good or a bad inspiration according to my own nature. And I am the one who's going to decide whether I will bring that into the world of action. For instance, let's think about that somebody said something unpleasant, and I have a thought that I need to fight back, whether that thought is created by a spirit who may want to lead me to bad behavior, or if it's a psychological complex that I have, a difficult side that needs to be worked. The great question is that that's a moral choice that I need to struggle with. It's that which I will do and that which I will work throughout my inner life, through my shortcomings and my qualities. That is what's going to matter at that time for me to have emotional strength to not fall into that provocation and to be able to discern if I will put myself in an assertive way or perhaps in a more enlightening way, accepting way to try to solve that challenge. So our evolutionary level reflects our overall understanding of our ability to deal with these influences. But but now we're discovering all this process. That's why the spirits brought that to Kardec. You know, Alexandre, that's very interesting because you used a very precious word in our ethical life, and that word is responsibility. We're talking about this dimension within us that if we do not know, it will influence us unconsciously to make decisions many times unthought, sometimes non-consequential, sometimes consequential. And so added to this process, we also have the influence of the spirits. So see how complex that is. So the spirits that Kardec know that if there is something within you that is not good, if there is a ethical dilemma or challenge within you, if you have vices or problems or conflicts that you haven't yet tackled, that will be the entry points for these influences from a spiritual perspective, whether they be positive or negative. So to be good people, just, empathetic, kind, with ethical standards, of course, will connect us to good spirits who also share those same purposes. And as the spirit themselves say, if we are leaning towards violence, then we will have around us spirits who share those same tendencies. But if it is within us a chance that we have a tendency towards goodness, the same will happen. So our emotional life, sometimes it's not worked deeply because perhaps we still need to go back and learn more. But when Kardec talks about the influence over our thoughts, we're also talking about over our emotional field. It's not just perceiving a thought that is foreign to us, that may not be common to us. We're also affected emotionally for that presence of these spirits. And here is a point that we know the challenge of living our lives emotionally, and sometimes how that overwhelms us. So if we do not know ourselves, if we do not make an effort to get to know our deepest desires, if we don't have an awareness of the drivers that guide us, if we don't make a detailed analysis of the ideas we hold and the emotions that are evoked in our relations and the feelings that inhabit our souls, if we do not know these realities, then we have a lot of challenges with ourselves and through these processes that we can say is how the spirits influence us in a negative way. The spirits make it very clear if there is within you a negative spiritual influence, is because it is in you the key, the ability for them to connect to you. So we can't stop thinking about our responsibility around this moment and this movement that we make in our lives, and that we should take a more ethical and more loving stance. So when we don't know ourselves, we will be dragged by the deepest depths of our soul, whether they are unknown, repressed. And if we do not establish a more conscious connection with these processes within us, more easily we will fall prey to these spiritual processes that influence us. So the law of affinity tells us that we attract to us those who think and feel close to us. We have an expression in Brazil. I don't know if there's outside Brazil. Tell me who you walk with, and I'll tell you who you are. And this is a wrong expression because I can be working with volunteer my time or working in prisons, and it doesn't mean I am a bad person. But tell me what you think, and I will tell you who you walk with. Maybe a more valuable expression for us to understand who is around us. And that's what, Tiago, that Joanna de Angelis tells us about the importance of self-awareness, the importance of self-awareness for self-knowledge, and through that, that self-knowledge, our self-realization. So self-analysis, self-knowledge, and self-realization. The realization of that which we talked about in the last meeting when we talked about the self, the law of God within us, which is an unconscious impulse towards a better version of ourselves, towards a psychic equilibrium, and so that all that's pain, all that's shadow, may have a more organized expression. Perhaps that which we call chaos or evil is nothing but a deorganization of a factors that in another way would be positive. Anger would stop being anger and begins a force of expression. That weakness or a melancholy, they will stop seeing an excessive feeling, and maybe they just are just a broader range of feelings, a well-developed love, because everything that is human may exist in an inferior or superior expression, according to how psychology tells us. Jung uses that quite a bit. There's an inferior experience of something, or there's a superior experience of something. So within that, Tiago talked about this law of affinity. There is a difference that Emmanuel, the Spirit, brings us when he shares about sympathy and affinity. Affinity are their topics and things that we share, that we like. And so our vibrations, spiritually speaking, our mental emanations, and the presence of spirits around us, in part talks about our affinity. So affinity is a topic that I like, something that I desire. So it's not surprising that if within between Tiago and I, who are spiritists and psychologists, we may have vibrations and ideas and the sharing of the presence of spiritual entities who are also interested in psychology and spirituality, because they are common themes that we share mentally. Symphony, however, tuning, is different. It's about vibrations. For instance, we're going to talk about political conflicts. We may have people who have people with different political ideas, and we can say that they don't have affinity. What one wants to build, the other one hates, and they want to destroy, and they think the opposite. They don't have an affinity. But however, if both of them doing their politics in hatred, then they do have sympathy with each other. They connect with each other deeply. In fact, one begins to affect the other, and the spirits that will affect one could affect the other because they are connected by the hatred. They don't have affinity, but they have a tune to that feeling. So it's possible for me to have an affinity with spiritism, which is, I think, is a great topic. But even being a spiritist, in the moment that I'm taken by anger or jealousy or indignation, my affinity might be great. This topic is spiritism, but my tuning is not so great. And I open that possibility, that field, to be influenced. And I open my vibratory range, what some spiritualists call aura, my psychosphere, the sphere around me, that Emmanuel also calls our calling card from everybody. So even people they may try to treat us nicely, but we feel awkward or uncomfortable in that person's presence. It could be that their aura perhaps may not be aligned to us, but our energy is our calling card. It's more important than the ideas they bring or what they search or what they believe that they are. But our vibration Of course, we may have different moments during the day through a roller coaster of vibrations that come from our soul. Sometimes we are anguished for a reason. We can be going through a challenge. But there is this natural high and low, of course. But what we're talking about, the average of what we do, that which we build, that which we nourish in our soul somehow, and that can lead us to the idea of like the central desire that's within the unconscious of every being. This central desire is a format through which spirits can access it. My desire might be in a place of charity, but instead, if it's about power and growing up in the hierarchy of things, maybe my way of thinking may find a connection in spirits who wage war and who are combative. Of course, not that all hierarchy is negative. There's always a desire to advance work, but we're talking about those people who have a desire of being noted in above others. And that characteristic tends to connect us more to imperfect spirits, and tell us a little bit about the nature of our selves. Sometimes we are taken by our own tendency to have inferior feelings and thoughts, and so our the field of our aura can be called that calling card for us, and it connects really to this main desire, the central desire within us, like an unconscious key, like that movie, which is a sci-fi movie, of course. I think it's called Inception. Yes, it's Inception. You know, that man, Leonardo DiCaprio, who's not very good looking at all. It's a movie in scientific sci-fi that can go into the conscious of people and they can plant information. And one character is tormented, and that was a mechanism for to find out whether they are in the world of dreams or not. And it's very symbolic, of course. This is all symbolic. But he leaves an information recorded that, and that information leads to a problem later because she then has a fixed idea about that. And so we can say that all of us have that same mechanism. We have in our unconscious this central ideas, these pillars. And so we can think a little bit about complexes too. I don't know if you want to jump in, Tiago. Sure. I want to remind us that an important reflection that we do in Spiritism is that when we leave the physical body, when we discarnate, we don't become neither angels nor demons. We are who we are and what we are. So Alexander brings our human challenges that affect relationships, family, society. These same problems, if they're not solved, they continue and follow us into the spiritual realm. And so if I'm unable to forgive my father, and this is an example, for instance, I love my father very much, just an example. So we're really great friends. But if I'm unable to tackle those challenges, it stays. It's not, there's not a magic that solves everything. We'll continue to be that which we are with all our qualities and shortcomings. And we need to break this imaginary belief that spirits are different than us. They're us who have lived here once and who will again return another time through the law of reincarnation. So whether I hate, I don't like, if I love, all these affections remain alive and perhaps um, more strongly in the spiritual world because they also cry, they laugh, they are happy, and they fear, they miss us much the same way we do. in all kind of different affections that the soul manifests in. So we are the heirs of ourselves, because our soul brings within it this story of our actions, and that is our greatest inheritance that we take with us. So it's possible that a spirit to be jealous, yes. Can they hate somebody else? Yes, they can. Can they wish for vengeance? Yes. Can they suffer deeply by missing somebody who left prematurely and who can they not find in the spiritual world? Yes, yes, they can. So notice that as we think about the law of life, being human is part of that, and we have to accept that. And Kardec, as he asked the spirits, why do the spirits have these actions of persecuting others? And they say, because they also suffer, because they covet, they are jealous. So as we move away this fiction about what the spirits are and see a life naturally, and what this moment is for us, whether we are alive or outside of the physical body, we are finding something greater about the human condition. And if there's something that is human, it's our complexes. These ideas and emotional challenges that reflect our history, our relations, and many times these complexes are mobilized because they stay in our psyche and desire not to be conscious, but they stay there with us. Perhaps somebody who was made orphan early on may develop a complex related to the mother, that any effective relationship towards a feminine person can be seen as an abandonment. They don't realize, but I don't love that person. I'm in that relationship, but I don't love that person. We are moving apart, but it hurts me because I feel abandoned. These complexes review our deepest humanity and reflect questions and challenges that we need to work on to take care and tend to our souls. And Alexander, we can say that our complexes are the ways in which spirits can connect to us, because they know our Achilles heels. They know our vulnerabilities, even more than us sometimes. And so when we start to look at our sores, spiritually speaking, we say we need to tend to this. We need to look at that. I need to find a way for forgiveness. I need to take care of my longing, of my self-esteem. I need to find my worth and my purpose. Because for as long as we don't look deep within us to our deepest needs, our complexes, where we will find our histories from this and previous lives, pulsating with very energetic images and feelings, causing us challenges, problems, and making our lives less healthy. So, as spirits and spiritists, we need to take control over our own self knowledge, self esteem, self discovery. It's a way to obtain clarity and enlightenment and self awareness, so that if somebody comes, spiritually speaking, who may perhaps influence on us and provoke within us certain sensations, we can say, no, I already know this. I already know what the feeling is. And that feeling is not really mine, it's not part of my history. So we'll begin to shine a light more deeply within us so that we can become more aware of who we are. And if we think about this idea of getting to know more about ourselves, we are then creating a sort of therapy for us to shield ourselves from the influence of spirits, even in the field of mediumship. And we talk about complexes, as Thiago was saying and shared that example, this child who was abandoned early on. Psychological complexes is something that's very well known when it comes to psychology. It was created by Jung, and then it was adopted by Freud. And many people talk about complexes, inferiority complex, superiority complex, complex, paternal complex. What it's important for us to understand is that they are nuclei of experiences. So we have thousands of complexes. We have inner child complexes, the adult person within us, their nexus for experiences. We have a complex about death and many different aspects. And these complexes, they are a network of associations, thoughts, and feelings that's present. And so I can be in a work meeting, for instance, and all of a sudden I am taken by the inner child complex, but not in its creative sense. But they can also come with that abandonment, and I feel inferior before a challenge in a moment that just a moment ago will be easy for me to handle. But I may feel inferior to other people in that moment. I can be very loved, and all of a sudden, I am taken by the complex of anger. And we can even joke and say, like, I can have my pit bull complex. I'm a great driver during traffic, calmly, listening to music, and all of a sudden, somebody comes in front of me or hits my car, and I walk out of there. I can walk out of that with my conciliating side, but if something doesn't go well in my life, it makes it easier for me to be taken by my Mike Tyson complex. Perhaps Young didn't write about this because they didn't know Mike Tyson, but maybe I was taken by this very macho complex, if we can say that, and fight during traffic. So it is almost as if there were different characters within us. And Jung arrived at the theory of complexes studying mediumship. He evaluated spiritualist sessions for 6 years, in which his cousin, who was 15 years of age, who was a medium who did not know a lot about education, and her German was very poor, when she connected with spirits and spoke on behalf of spirits and their discarnated grandfather, she spoke classic German, which was very sophisticated. She spoke ancient Greek and other languages that she did not know. So Jung even worked as a medium himself. So what happens? That during the process of the cessation of mediumship, because mediumistic abilities are fleeting, sometimes they may stop during a period in our lives, like a test, a trial for mediums during life. It's a possibility. And this cousin began to imagine communications and fake them because she was attracted to the attention that she harnessed with that, and Jung understood that and was bothered by that. So his first theory about mediumship, he will say that the medium is sincere because they believe that they are voicing the spirits, but that which he thinks is spirits are psychological complexes from our conscience. And he'll say, I cannot discuss whether spirits exist or not, but I can say that mediums are nothing but people who have the ease of bringing that out of their unconscious. Later, Jung will change that and say that mediums indeed have abilities, but that's healthy and creative, and that there is a superior side of their creativity that first expresses itself as a spirit, and unfortunately, his is only being left in his writings and personal writings. He says that the theory of mediumship is the bestest way to express and attest to the idea of a spirituality, especially because he was a medium himself, and many times he will even share details about the experiences he has that helped him build his psychology. But that's perhaps a talk for another time. But why am I going there? What Jung brings us, saying that there's no true spirits communicating through a medium, but there's an unconscious there. It's not completely wrong according to our perspective. He's talking about something that comes from the unconscious of the medium, which we call animism. We know that in the terms of anthropology, can also be understood differently. And they say that animism is that when a tribe, for instance, attributes to a natural phenomena a personification, like the spirit of the river, or perhaps when a child says that the soccer ball, the football talk to them, they place a soul in it. So that's the concept from anthropology. But in Spiritism, animism came from psychology, from the studies of Alexander Aksakov, a Russian psychologist that studied mediumship. And in Spiritism and animism is when something from the medium's unconscious comes from the medium's unconscious. So the medium says that there's a spirit talking through them, but it's actually their own spirit who's bringing their own anguish and own experiences, or even a wisdom from different lives. And within Spiritism, there's also a concept, and we can debate whether that's right or wrong, that our critical sense should always be present for us to evaluate spirit communications. But there's also information that Camille Flammarion, the great astronomer from the 19th century, who was a friend of and that when he was sharing mediumistic communications from his mentor Galileo Galilei, he was mistaken because he was actually the reincarnation of Galileo Galilei. He thought that he was communicating from the spirit Galileo Galilei, but he did not know that he was Galileo Galilei. And in that case, there was animism, and that was a legitimate animism because it was an enlightened message that was coming from his own spirit. But there's another way of looking at animism too, and that is the personalization. And that connects with what Jung said. That's when the medium brings something that's a mental cliche, the result of their unconscious, something that is not true, that is not part of their soul, the knowledge of their soul, or their spirit, but it's something from their psychological complexes. So, according to Jung, there is a possibility, the connection to our complexes and to the spirits. And who explores that? Of course, Joanna de Angelis does. In books like Life, Challenges and Solutions or Personal Triumph, she will tell us that it's true, these complexes, that the spirits find an entry point within us, which relates to that which we talked about earlier before, attunement and syntony. So within me, Alexander, if there's a complex that is demanding from me something, let's say a judge, a judgmental a judge that doesn't let anything slide by, I can say that's a side of me, an unconscious side of me, a complex that sometimes manifests as an aspect of my personality. Of course, through that complex, all those spirits who perhaps want to maybe communicate in the same way will find resonance to such an extent that we may not be able to distinguish that which is ours or that which is spiritual influence. So, is that demanding side within me my own voice, or is it a spirit who is connected to me? Sometimes we don't know. But as we talked about psychological complex and spiritual influence, right? It's a lot for us to try to understand. But in truth, that expands our perception and helps us understand that these are the plugs, so to speak, through which spiritual communications come to us. Remembering that Joanna de Angelis reiterates that to the extent that we elaborate a complex, it doesn't stop being, it just changes from being a negative one to being a source of creativity. So that complex, for instance, of the very judgmental judge, it becomes a critical thinking process, a side that allows me to judge things in a healthy way and more balanced. And that happens to the extent that I get to know myself and work on myself. And of course, the good spirits will then find space within all those who are looking to transform themselves, whether they are mediums or not, whether they are spiritists or not, whether they are part of any religion or not. What matters is the goodwill, our desire to get to know ourselves and improve. You know what I am reminded of, Alexandre? I remember the psychological side of Forrest Gump. If you remember that classic movie, when Forrest Gump is in the Vietnam War and he saves Tenant Dan, Daniel will say, "Let me go. I don't want to be saved." Because there was this certain sense of honor to his ancestors that he should die in service like his father and his grandfather. As he is saved and has his legs amputated, that man finds himself in a very painful process of losing purpose, this inability to relate to women, and we see through the way the actor carries out their role that we see that's a bitter man, a man that's very angry, a man who's not happy about life, who cannot find solace and comfort anywhere. And if you remember, if you watched it, there's a moment in a movie in which these complexes, this inferiority complex, something happens. Is when they're putting a business together to fish shrimp, and all the coast of the state of Georgia is overrun by a tempest, and all the boats sink except for the boat that Forrest and Daniel had. And in Forrest's narrative, he says, I remember him tied to the top of the mast of the ocean, yelling to God to kill him. That take him's challenge, that challenging the forces of nature. And Forrest says, and next day, when the sun comes up, I don't know, but in that night, in that crisis, in that tempest, Tenant Dan made peace with God within him. Because we see him swimming and he will transform. He gets married, begins to smile. That's very interesting. He smiles again in a way of reliving, of rebuilding of his soul in relation to his potentials and the challenges he had that was harmed by the trauma in his life as a soldier and a person who had legs amputated, who felt he was not worth for living. So I bring this so that we can understand how this dimension of these complexes, when they're not tended to, when they are connected to difficult experiences, stay within us. Alexander highlighted that mediumship can be a vehicle for those who become an instrument of communication. So imagine that I have a complex, that I have a challenge in being touched with my emotions. I see myself as a man or woman very rational, very rigid, very assertive, and do not allow myself to get in touch with my feelings. And I find myself all of a sudden being a medium in my first mediumistic experience in a spiritist group, trying to educate my mediumship. I feel the nearness of a spirit that only knows how to cry. I'm telling you a real story. A friend of mine here in Brasilia, a military man, very stoic, very rigid, who saw himself in contact very tender soul that needed to cry. And what happened? His complexes are related through which experiences he does not want to get in touch with. And that emotional side will take some safety from him. So it leads him to be detached. As he was crying the tears of the spirit, he also cried his own tears. He got in touch with his own emotions. As he was able to feel the sores and the sadnesses of that feminine, that spirit, he was also crying his own sores and his own pains. So beyond just a phenomena, there's also the connection between two souls that need to find a healthy place. And mediumship can be therapeutic. It can be an instrument so that we can look upon ourselves and into ourselves. And I remember that after that meeting, this friend, he was trembling, he was shaking. And I asked him, "How are you?" He says, "I am well, but that is something that I do not know, but I am open to living." So notice that in this field of experiments, as the question 471 in the Spirits book, when we feel this sensation of anguish, of great inner satisfaction, happiness, without us knowing the cause for that, should we attribute that to our inner well-being? And the spirits reply, and perhaps one of the rare responses in which the unconscious shows up. The spirits say it's almost always an effect, the effect of a communication that happens between spirits. So this psychic relationship with spirits can trigger these feelings. So there's something that's missing here, that we also need to think about our own feelings, our own conditions, our own anemic conditions, as Alexander has said. For us, I see there's a question, but perhaps we can leave that for later. I don't know how that's going to go. After, we'll do that after. After that, we'll have questions and answers. Okay. So our spiritual history, where we lived, in which culture we were inserted, which experiences we had, which traumas, what pleasures, all of this mosaic of experiences that configure our spiritual history, it's right here, present in us. Through a similarity of experiences, the spirits have a greater ease in getting in touch with us, as Alexander said. So for us, as we think about the image of an ethic of taking care of self, of autonomy, so we think that these manifestations or these relations should be as ethical and loving and just as should be the search for our own relations here. And this is about conjugal relations, relations with our children, relations with our community, and social relations that we establish as well. So there is a philosophical implication that's very important that speaks to not only the effect or the influence of the spirits with us through feelings and thoughts. There is a sense that those who are close to us, who impact us negative or positively, there is the meaning, a purpose for that. And I will use an expression here that I like very much from Martin Buber, the meeting, the rendezvous. Every time, every time the two souls are together, they're a meeting, the me and the other. It's a deep meaning between a connection of two souls. This feeling is very negative. Well, it's still a rendezvous, it's still a meeting. And sometimes we interpret the anger from others or of affliction could be that they have not yet understood that, or it could be reflected on us. So, violence, for instance, which is a great antithesis to ethics, it's a manifestation of a soul that does not know how to communicate emotionally other than through hurting. So, we need to find other ways in which the soul can express itself. So, in truth, there will be souls who perhaps are a little belligerent, souls who have not yet found out what is to take care of others, to love. But as we understand that and know who we are and who others are, as human as we are, whether they incarnate or discarnate, we'll be able to establish in this moment that we're in and the Spirit's intervention, we'll find that is a relationship that requires ethics and our tender loving care.
Shall we go to the questions?
Should we go to questions or should we have one more comment? I think, Tiago, are you ready? Should we focus to the questions? Maybe we can focus them on now.
Okay. So I'm gonna read the questions in English, and then I will translate.
So he's going to read the questions in English, and then he's going to do in Portuguese.
So far,
Bob asked the following question. The examples quoted of spirits intervening in our corporeal lives seems to be mostly malign or bad influences finding and exploiting our weaknesses. But what about good spirits having a beneficial influence on us to guide us to repair our weaknesses? Surely, good spirits are not necessarily powerless compared to bad spirits.
Powerless compared to bad spirits. Vou ler a tradução para vocês.
So I already have the translation, Alexander says.
Deixa eu ler aqui para ver.
Perhaps there's somebody who may not understand that.
A tradução da pergunta é o seguinte: os exemplos citados de espíritos que intervêm em nossas vidas corpóreas parecem ser, em sua maioria, influências malignas ou más que encontram e exploram nossas fraquezas. Mas e os bons
He's
espíritos
reading the
têm
question again in
influência
Portuguese.
benéfica sobre nós para nos guiar na reparação das nossas fraquezas? Certamente, os bons espíritos não são necessariamente impotentes em comparação com os maus espíritos.
There's something there that's special of this question that was very well worded. Of course, good spirits influence us all the time. In fact, we could think that the natural development of our lives could be something chaotic without the assistance of these good spirits. And here I make a comparison. The form through which a father or a mother have a natural tendency to protect their child, the good spirits, those who are not perfect yet, but who are more evolved than we are, like our mentors, spiritual mentors, they have this natural desire to help us. And not by chance, the Romans talked about the Newmans, or we can talk about Socrates' diamond when he spoke about the voice that accompanied him, and he called him his voice, and that he at the summit of his philosophy came through that voice. So, throughout the steps of humanity, or the spirits that helped Young and talked to him as we spoke, or many other scientists who were helped, and many luminaries in culture, science, religions, and perhaps even us. The good spirits are certainly there to help us. It is sometimes said, for instance, that the doctors, even when have a materialistic perspective, are assisted by spirits who are vested in the good results because of the patients. And these spirits go in one way or another within the realm of possibilities to intervene without interfering with free will. They will try to promote the good carrying out of a procedure. Of course, there's other factors that determine whether that will work or not. And there are other things in which spirits cannot intervene as help, but they do help whenever possible. And we can even say that sometimes we may make a mistake, may slack, but our mentors or our spiritual guides, they are capable of doing their work. And somebody mentioned in the chat, like dreams, for instance, the good spirits sometimes seek to give in our dreams positive symbols that will help us to work and to develop ourselves. And when I say positive symbols, I'm not saying just pleasant things, but content that will help us to have an analysis of our emotions. And that's why dreams can be therapeutic. They will bring to us content, the things that we need to pay attention to. Sometimes they bring us difficult things, sometimes they bring us wonderful things. But it's not just every once in a while. All the time, they're inviting us to forgiveness, to reflection. Sometimes we don't take a specific way home, and later on we find out there was an accident in that way, and we have to be thankful if perhaps it was not a spirit who inspired us to take that different route. Sometimes we find small challenges and we say, you know, I felt that I shouldn't have gone that way, or I shouldn't have done this thing because I thought that was not the great way to be. But look at that. After that, I suffered a little bit of a challenge. I had something, I lost some money. I should have maybe have followed that advice, that intuition. Maybe there was a good spirit who was alerting me, and I didn't know how to value that or listen to that at that point. So, so all the time the spirits are helping us. The good spirits are helping us. Of course, um, how much we are willing to transform ourselves in a positive way, because we don't have to be perfect, but we have to have goodwill. Certainly, spirits will be close to us. So our goodwill attracts spirits, even if we're not doing things greatly or making mistakes. We may be doing it with goodwill, with a desire to get it right. And that by itself, the desire to get something done that is right and correct, uh, elicits help. So it's a matter of time for us to do that. And so we may have the presence of good spirits with us. Even in our smallness, they are around us. I don't know if you want to add something to it, Thiago. So, friends, let's not forget of a truth of life. There's always a love from someone. All of us has at least one person who loves us. I'm certain of that. And if they've chosen to be with us in this journey, in this incarnation, it will go all the way to the end. Because, of course, somebody who is wiser than us, more mature than us. Because we cannot have somebody who is at the same level that we are to guide us. And we don't know what to do. So, so our guides are always somebody who loves us deeply and, and who knows our story, our history very well. The question asked by your friend, we are constantly benefiting from that assistance. And sometimes they leverage our goodwill, our generosity to place us in circumstances or find people who may need help. Once I was here in Brazil and I was driving to a very important meeting. It was our yearly planning for the Brazilian Spiritist Federation. And I was arriving a couple of minutes before driving, and all of a sudden, I felt like, oh, don't go there just yet. Keep driving. I'm saying, no, I have to go to the meeting. No, just keep going straight. And by intuition and impulse, I felt, and I followed, kept going by the car. About 300 feet later, I saw a woman with two other people. This woman had passed out. She had fainted in a bus stop right in front of a hospital from the university. Yeah. I stopped the car and I said, what's happening? She had left from the hotel, took the medicine, and she's not feeling well. And we don't know what to do or where to go because we're not from here. We need help. And so I understood, okay. And so I helped the way I could. So these kinds of events are the manifestation of the kindness of spirits. Sometimes they will use us as instruments for goodness. Many are the stories that people who are helped and assisted in very peculiar and critical situations. Perhaps because our average spiritual condition in a world that has so many challenges, so much pain, and so many problems to be tackled, places in a way to be more easily to be in touch with the challenges than the solutions. So, as we become aware of ourselves, to place ourselves in a level of consciousness so that we can also be accessed by the good spirits to help. Once, when I was really, really young, more than 30 years ago, I heard somebody very clearly, don't do this. And I was scared because I was doing something I shouldn't. I was putting myself in risk. I didn't even know Spiritism, but that scared me. The protection, the guidance. And it's important to say, too, that prayer, as Joanna de Angelis says, it is the most direct and efficient way of getting in touch with God. If in our moments of doubt, in our moments of crisis, that we're thinking, what should I do now? There's no solution to this challenge that I face. I don't know what to do. Let's leverage prayer. We may not get the answer, but we will have the connection with great energies and presence that will help us to calm ourselves and overcome that which may seem overwhelming. So let's trust we are the love for somebody, and there's at least one person who loves us.
Obrigado, Thiago. Obrigado, Alexandre. Moving on to the next question. We have a question here from Anne Sinclair. She says, what suggestion does Joanna give us in terms of self-knowledge, as so much is hidden in the unconscious?
Can I start, Alexander? All right. And Anne, who's asking us, What is the therapy of self-knowledge? What can I do that's practical to go towards this dive, this inner dive towards myself? I think the first move is to be calm, to disconnect our anxiety, to calm ourselves, and to start to think about what are my true necessities? What is the purpose of my life? What am I searching for? What do I want? To begin with our very own self analysis and to deepen that self analysis. And as Joanna suggests, to not be afraid of getting naked before our own consciousness. We will see things that are ugly, but they are keys for us to find that which is beautiful. Second, perhaps we can just, an exercise, just list all the emotions that we have that are most disturbing to us and try to find what are causing this. Why am I so aggressive when somebody criticizes me? Why do I cry so much when I feel lonely? Why is it so hard to be hopeful when I don't see hope anywhere else? Let's do this analysis of these disturbing emotions we have. Joanna the Angelis asks us for will. And she says that in the chapter that we're studying, without will, we are not able to fight our own fears and deal with our challenges. Be careful with the explanations, with justifications about who we are and why we are that way. Oh, I don't deserve to be that. These are all excuses from people who are afraid to do this analysis of the self. And also search this holistic, integral approach to health. Emotional health, you know, environmental health, and sometimes we don't even have time to be in touch with nature. Physical health, exercise, take care of our body, just like the way we take care of the soul. And to the extent that we develop greater consciousness of who we are and what we do, we can then, once we know where we are, we can think about where we want to go. If all of us look at our own histories and our own stories and pains, we'll find challenges that are perhaps still need to be healed. So we need to look at them so we can follow new ways. Something else that Joanna says, when we permit ourselves to look at ourselves, we may not like what we see, but this movement, it is a great treasure to your life. And it will help you find out who eventually you may become. I think more things that we can say, but I think the first step is that, to have the courage to look at oneself. Am I a selfish person? Am I a person who's not empathetic or helpful to others? I say that I'm Christian, but do I have social and personal prejudices? So we have to face these dimensions of us. Oh, but that's very dark and very hard. Yes, but it's part. It's part of who we are, and that's okay. The base of our mountain of the soul is humility. For us to be able to climb this mountain and to get the top of our soul, we need to recognize who we are. So let's do the first step. Excellent, Thiago. I think you've answered this. I don't think you have anything else to add, especially because we're coming up on our time too. Fabrício, I don't know if we have time for another question, or if it's time perhaps for us to close, and then we can try to address that somehow later. I am going to I'm going to suggest that maybe you have some final considerations, and if there are other questions that come, you can come to us during chat and I can send it to you. I'm just gonna warn you that not be surprised by the fireworks that might be in my background, and there people are celebrating some things here. So I just want to thank you for your attention. I suggest, of course, that we continue to study this topic, which is way deeper than what we can address here. It's a very great way of looking at life. And I go back to that idea from Emmanuel, the Spirit, that the mind is the mirror of life everywhere. And that Joanna de Angelis will tell us that our interpretation of our events, emotionally speaking, the way we understand things, would always she will always remind us to believe in ourselves. It's an essential step for us to deal with our idiosyncrasies. As we talked about the unconscious, it can be so scary, so daunting. But there's also a lot of great things that will come from that, even if it may at first come out in a more challenging way. But there's fulfillment in that work of growing, because that's the psychology of the immortal spirit. We cannot be spiritists without diving in the wider sense, a psychological analysis of ourselves, of our spirit, and the forms through which we can contribute and relate to people around us. Whether these people around us may be hard or difficult, or may they be very pleasant and enlightened, all of them will need what's best within us and that which we can discover every single day. So it's a great pleasure to be with all of you here today. I also want to thank everybody. I feel very welcome here, so thank you for that. And one life, friends, is just a fragment of a long journey. The value that we attribute to one life could be defining for us for a future. And if we choose to live well now, not fake happiness or a fantasy, but the idea that every single happenstance, every single event has to be unpacked in a deeper way. If I fall ill, if the parent perhaps has abandoned me, the ability to feel loved or not. It will open new horizons on what it is to be alive and to investigate. So let's make every single second count. Let's reflect about our potentials. Does it mean that you can be more? Yes. You can grow, you can be a lot more, and that's going to be up to us. But within the Spiritist ethics, we are together. Because when I find love in a relationship with the other also finds love in a relationship with me, so that we can be together in future meetings, new possibilities. And thank you for all your attention today.
Thank you. Thank you, Thiago, Alexandre, and Dan for that very interesting discussion. And thank you everyone who joined us here tonight. See you soon. Bye for now.